Salamlar herkese. Bugünkü tədbirimizdə uğurlu bir oyun stüdyosunun keçməli olduğu 3 mərhələdən danışacağıq. Bu tədbirimizdə bizə İvan Shyika kömək edəcək. Tədbirimiz 2 hissədən ibarət olacaq. Birinci hissədə İvan bizə öz biliklərini paylaşacaq. Digər hissədə isə sual-cavab sessiyası olacaq.
Salam, thank you for having me. It is my pleasure to be here. Let me share my screen. You should see the slides now. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see the slide.
Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. And without further ado, let's get into it. I strongly believe that a road to project success doesn't lie in just the right goal or a well-doing team or a productive workflow. Those things are important, but they are not enough in themselves. A good plan will not guarantee you a good execution. A group of professionals does not mean a good working culture, and fancy tools don't necessarily bring fancy results. However, I believe that it is bringing those things together, like pieces of a puzzle, that sets you up for success. And like any puzzle, it takes time to figure it out. Over the years of managing my team projects, I noticed how certain actions, mindsets, and ideas helped me run my projects better and manage my teams better. And with this talk, I wanted to share some of those ideas and actions so that you can use them for yourself as well. My name is Shyika. I have been developing games since I was 11 years old. I started out as a programmer, but eventually realized that organizing things I like much more. Most recently, I had the privilege to work on an ambitious indie project called Debug, which you can see on the background right now, and as a producer and project manager. And in another role, I was a team leader and senior developer managing 3 junior developers for their student midterm project. I also have a YouTube channel dedicated to game development tutorials, devlogs, and video essays. This talk is structured into 3 chapters, each a logical continuation of the previous chapter. We will start with vision, so what you want to achieve. Then we will go into collaboration, discussing how you as a team can handle yourself to work for that vision. And finally, we will look into methodology to develop the day-to-day process of how you reach that goal. I will suggest several mindsets, actions, and ideas in each of those chapters and explain why they matter or how they are beneficial. And at the end of the talk, we'll have plenty of time for questions, so make sure to save them. And with this being said, let's go to the first part. Vision. The more complex your vision is, the more complex your project is, the more it is important to remember at all times what you are doing and why it matters, what you hope to gain from it. And project and games, even small indie games, are very complex. So let's start with voluntary constraints. We hope to make a game better by adding more into it. More characters, more locations, more content overall, or more features to make it more fun. But in reality, it is like sending a child with your credit card to a candy shop. Very soon you have found out that they have overeaten, spent your entire salary, and they bought much more than they could eat. Because what they thought is that the more they buy, the more candies they have, it would be better. But of course it is not like this. And now, if you replace this child with us, developers, and the candies with game features, you will see that we have the exact same problem in our industry, where entire AAA games can get cancelled because they had feature creep. And think about your experience. Have you ever missed a deadline because you wanted to add too much? Here is a graph that explains my point. I'm using a laser. You can see the laser, right?
Yes.
Okay. So sometimes, especially in the beginning, your game, of course, it needs more content, it needs more features. Otherwise, it feels boring or empty. So you start adding more. But it's important not to add too much, because then it gets overcomplicated. And worst case, you can just make the game confusing and overcomplicated. So instead of making game more fun, you just made it worse. You want to be in this golden middle, in this middle where you have just the right features, just the right complexity of them. And what puts you in this golden middle is not only your ambition to add more and to make something bigger, better, but also the knowledge of when you should stop and discipline to do so. Self-discipline and restraint are as important as your ambition when making a game. And this is why I want to talk about voluntary constraints. To paraphrase Mr. Sefton Hill, game director of Batman Arkham games, voluntary constraints are rules that allow you to focus all your energy on what counts. They help you stay away from distractions, like things that seem cool in other games, but would be of no point in your game. And let's indeed take Batman Arkham City as our example. So Arkham City was a sequel to Batman Arkham Asylum, which they decided to make the world's smallest open world game. And it was small. It was just about 1 square kilometer. But it doesn't mean it was unambitious. These constraints allowed to make them a small but packed, various, and dense city, very unique city, with great interiors. Having focused on just this small area also gave them extra time to work on other game design areas as well. And in the end, the game enjoyed great success that was no worse than its prequel. A big reason, as you can see, for this success was exactly that decision, that constraint of not being distracted by an unnecessarily big world. Those constraints don't have to follow any specific formula, at least to my knowledge. You don't have to make the world's smallest something. What I suggest is just think about what might distract you later in the development, what you may waste time on, and proactively plan how you will limit this distraction. For example, when I was working on a game with my team, we decided to make a fast-paced first-person shooter, kind of like old-style Doom or Serious Sam, if anyone knows. But immediately, even though it was fast-paced, we immediately said that there would be no parkour, and it wouldn't be meant for speedrun. So it wouldn't be something like Mirror's Edge or Ghost Runner, none of this. See, we defined the vision and immediately defined what this vision was not. This is the same idea with those voluntary constraints. And make sure that you document them with the rest of your game vision, because if you don't, they will be forgotten or misinterpreted later. Which brings me to my next point, vision alignment. Think about this. You have an entire team of people with their own heads. What they think they're making is probably not the same game you have in your mind. And it will show itself over time. At first, you start to disagree on what helps the game or what makes it worse, and eventually you have to throw away someone's work. Not because it was bad, but because what they created didn't align with what you imagined for your game. So unless you want to have such conflicts, unless you want to be pulled in different directions like that, you need to agree on what the game is with your team. Do it early and reinforce this agreement regularly. There was a research in our industry called the Game Outcomes Project, with over 200 participants from various game companies. It aimed to determine factors which were linked to game success or failure, and it looked into many things from company methodology to company culture to even game genre and platforms. There are many great takeaways, but one of the most important ones was that having a clear game vision and a team that agreed on this vision and was excited about it was the number one predictor of game success in terms of sales, ratings, and team satisfaction. This factor, having a clear game vision and a team that was excited about it and agreeing on it, this factor showed to be more important than even company size, company culture, team experience, or production methodology. What it tells us is that if you want your game to be successful, and you probably won't if you're here, one of the best ways you can ensure that is by having a clear game vision, what the game will be at the end, and having your team have the same vision and be excited about this. But now, how do you align the vision? Here are a few things I can recommend from my experience. First of all, document this vision and make it accessible. When you put things in writing, they become tangible. It is now much easier to see if you don't fully understand what you're talking about, or if somebody else misunderstands or disagrees with you. 2. The game vision must be discussed and remembered often. For example, whenever you're making a game design decision, make sure to check your voluntary constraints, your game design pillars. Remind about them to your team, and make sure that you're not breaking those rules you have set for yourself. For example, for myself, even when it was something small in my project, I always reminded my team. So, we value this fast-paced thing, and we value fun. Does this align with our vision? Something like this. And finally, play test often. There is a saying that you may be familiar with. An image is worth 1,000 words. And when you let a person play your game, they see and feel what the game is. You set their mind in the same direction the game is already going, and they will naturally come up with ideas of how to make it better, of what suits it well. They don't need to speak with you or try to understand what you mean. They already feel what the game is. And now, as we discussed voluntary constraints and we discussed vision alignment, it's time to make a plan and a schedule for our game. So once you have a goal, you need a plan to make it come to life. And then you need to map this plan onto a realistic schedule. There is a problem with many passion projects. They may be developed, they may look great, everything is wonderful, but they never seem to get any closer to the release. If your passion project is just a hobby, maybe it's fine, but if you want to make a living off your game, if you want to have a studio, you need a release date and a complete game that you ship on that day. And a good vision can help you avoid a bad game design, but not entirely prevent scope creep. Voluntary constraints help with it greatly, but another great tool is simply having a schedule. Because with schedule, you have limited time to work with, and in this limited time, you have to carefully pick what to develop so that The game still feels fun and complete, even though you have not developed everything from your backlog, which realistically speaking, you won't be able to anyway. Now, I must note that ideally, this plan and the schedule must be developed only after you decide you core idea of the game, this core vision. Because there would be no point in trying to make a plan if you don't know what you want to achieve with it. And defining this idea of what the game is can take you from months to years of pre-production of the game. So what I would suggest, unless you have a deadline, try not to rush with developing a plan and a schedule before you have a vision. Establish the vision first and the plan and the schedule after it. Now, let's recap part 1. Set voluntary constraints to limit distractions and focus on what matters, what makes your game better. 2. Align the team on the vision so that you're all working in the same direction, toward the same goal. And 3. Once you have a good enough vision of your game, develop a plan and a schedule of how you develop it. So, we have a better idea of what we want to develop, our team wants the same, and we have some idea of how and when we will achieve it. It is time for us to ensure that we are functional as a team, and you specifically are helpful as a leader. So let's start with valuing your team. Producers are often leaders, regardless if it is officially part of our responsibility or not. We know what the project is, we know it deeper than most others, and it allows us to see it objectively, but it also sometimes causes a lack of empathy. So I want to remind you to, at all times, respect and value your team. You need to remember that they are really all you have right now, and if they were to leave, it would be difficult to replace them. These things may sound obvious or simple as I'm talking about them right now, but it's very easy to forget about them after you have worked for some time together, after you got to know each other, and you have some issue that you think should not be an issue at all. I think it helps to remind yourself that your team is no less smart than you are. Think about this. Our industry is one of the most challenging ones. People don't stay in it by chance. Your people, your team, have adapted constantly, have learned new skills to be where they are at right now. And with all this experience, if they are having a problem, this is probably a real problem. Maybe they even need help. So don't disregard their problems. And also, don't think of yourself in separation from your team. From a manager's point of view, yes, you are overseeing someone, you are a supervisor as a manager. But as a leader, it's not as the same as being the manager. A leader is often one in the trenches, working with his or her team, not above them. Just like on this illustration, the leader sets an example and encourages others to follow them. Sometimes it means that the leader develops the plan and drives everything. They are at the head of everything. Sometimes they would be stepping back, just supporting and empowering others. But the idea is, at all times, a leader is there for and with their teams. You're all in the same boat. All the project problems affect everybody to some degree. And looking at your team with you versus them perspective will not help you. It makes it easy to start blaming your people, which doesn't help solve any problems, but only usually creates more. So instead of helping solve the problem, you become part of it. So once again, appreciate your team and Don't isolate yourself from them. Not in your practices, not in your communication, not even in your own head. You're one with your team. You're always you and them. It is always we. Which brings me to my next point. Keep yourself and your ego under control. Leaders are often guides, or rather, almost always. Their decision making is like a compass to the team that they are led by. Now, imagine that this compass was off. That would be terrible. Now the entire team and project would be directed in the wrong direction. They would be working for the wrong purpose. This is why the cost of a leader's mistake is often so much higher than that of a specialist. It is much more difficult to notice and fix it quickly, but usually this mistake can affect the entire team or project. So no matter how busy or overwhelmed you may be, you need to make sure that you are not led by the wrong things. Because we as leaders cannot afford to be delusional. We must think straight and rational, not even for ourselves, but because others depend on us doing so. You need to regularly take proper care of your physical and mental health. Because when we are tired, physically or emotionally, our emotions can cloud our judgment. Worse, our ego can get in there. And most dangerously, our ego can hide behind things that can seem selfless or just very good at the first sight. There is a problem that we, ambitious young people, often have, a mistake that we often make: selfish heroism. Selfish because we are driven not by our ideals, but by our ambition to be great because of pursuing them. In other words, we do good things not because it's good to do them, but because we hope to be recognized for doing them. And for a long time, we will not even realize or admit it. We will push ourselves tirelessly, thinking about how the project success will be attributed to us, how proud we will be to speak about it. We will push ourselves to rush, to disregard, and take on commitments that we will not be able to keep. But in the end, we will not succeed. We will just exhaust ourselves and make a lot of painful mistakes for ourselves, for our teams, and for our companies. I think we must remember that true heroes don't aim to be heroic. They are not driven by recognition. True heroes do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. And think about this. If you are being heroic for personal gain, are you a hero at all? Now, I'm not saying you should be unambitious or drop your commitments when you feel tired or just don't try to be good. In fact, I suggest the opposite. Be responsible and learn how to manage yourself so that you're not driving yourself insane and putting your people at risk. Remember that they follow us. This is why we are leaders. It puts great power in our hands, but it also means that we are now responsible for those people. So take good care of yourself and make sure that you are driven by the good of your project and your team, not by your emotion or ego. And speaking of power and responsibilities, we need to assign roles and our powers early. So, together with your team, assign the areas of responsibility and areas of influence for each person. So, each area, game design, programming, art direction, all of those areas, they need to have a person at the helm who can make the ultimate decisions on them. And the earlier you agree on these things, the better it will be. First of all, it will allow you to set clear expectations. There is a saying, if everybody is responsible, nobody is responsible. Not even because people hope that somebody else will do their work, but because somebody may feel like they're not qualified enough, or they are not trusted enough, or it's just not their responsibility to do something. But if you tell them that it is their work, if you assign them to this task or area, you set clear expectations of what you want from them. They now know what they need to do. 2. You inspire accountability, which motivates people to do their best work. Even though they are now responsible for something, they feel like their choices matter. And I'm sure you can understand how motivating it can be to know that your choices matter. You want to do your best work because of this. And last but not least, you can prevent conflicts by agreeing on your powers. It saves you from situations where people cannot agree on each other, and making a decision in favor of one person or a group of people can feel like a betrayal of another. These situations are quite dangerous for teams. They can even cause team collapses. But if you agree in advance on who is making the decision, you don't need to fight when the decision is made. This idea is just about having a person whom the team trusts. They don't have to understand each other all the time, but the team trusts that this person has the best judgment to do these kind of decisions. Now, I don't suggest autocracy, where one person or people make all their decisions based only on what they think is right. Having ownership does not mean being a tyrant. Decisions must be based on reason, not on any fame, power, or whatnot. It doesn't matter whom the arguments come from or how popular or unpopular they are. It is important that you allow your people to share their opinions and not just listen to them, but ask for them with genuine interest. Because the decision makers can find in their perspective something new. Those perspectives can be new to the decision makers, informing better decisions. At the same time, it's not a democratic voting or following every suggestion you receive. Of course, try to find a win-win solution that works for everybody, that everybody is happy with. But know that it will not always be possible. Your ultimate goal is to find the best solution for the game, not an all-inclusive compromise that suits your team. Because such a compromise is usually either impossible or just bad quality for your game. You don't want this. And the ways you can agree on the decisions, responsibilities, on the powers, there are many ways to do that. If your team is anything more than 3 people, I recommend looking into something like a RACI chart, where you categorize people between responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. But regardless of the tool, the approach you choose to use, just make sure that your team understands this approach and that you all agree on the powers and responsibilities you assign to people. Now, let's wrap this up. First of all, you're one with your team, so value them and be helpful. 2. Make sure that your judgment is sound. Don't be led by your emotions or ego. And finally, assign clear responsibilities and areas of influence, and do it as early as you can. Now, we discussed our project vision, and we agreed on how we'll work with our team for this. It is time that we think about our day-to-day process that will get us to our goals. And let's start with why methodology is a do-it-yourself project. Your methodology, processes, and tools must be determined by your team and project needs. You can pick from many methodologies. There is Scrum, there is Waterfall, Extreme Programming, Kanban, Lean. There are many methodologies. Now, do you need to pick one of them and stick to it, follow it exactly? No. Rather, think of them like your templates, like guidelines that you're expected to modify. And if you think about it a little, you will realize that all this variety of methodologies was not there in the beginning. It came to be because somebody at some point had some project and none of the methodologies worked for them. So they needed to create something of their own. And you are in the same position. You need to tweak, modify, and combine those methodologies as much or as little as you need so that it works for your project and for your team. Let me give you an example from my own experience. On one of my projects, I had a team of 10 people. We were all across the globe, all working synchronously. And our methodology was inspired by Scrum, which has daily stand-up meetings. So, we have 10 people, all spread all around the world, different time zones, and they will work at all different times. Would it make sense to force all the 10 people to attend a 15-minute long meeting every single day, whether it is morning, day, or night for them? No. But we still need this information exchange. So, what we decided to do, instead of meetings, we started writing text reports at the end of our workdays in a special Discord text channel. As a result, we achieved the same communication and the same updates. We exchanged the same information without intruding into anyone's schedule with yet another meeting. And here is another example from the same team. We had sprints. We started with the recommended 1 week long sprints. It was pre-production and everybody was part-time, so there was not that much happening in between every week. We were really wasting time in unnecessary sprint kickoff meetings and writing low-value retrospectives. So what we decided to do is increase the sprint length to 2 weeks and then to 3 and 4. It made the individual sprints more substantial while reducing the time that we needed to spend switching between those sprints. It made me as a producer more available for my team. It gave us more things to reflect on at the end of the sprint. But most importantly, it gave us space to focus on doing real work, not on bureaucracy. We still benefited from doing the sprints. It's just that we found the length that worked for us. It was not the recommended length, but it was something that actually worked. Now, even though your methodology would be unique for your team and for your project, there are certain tips that can be given on organizing communication and your knowledge management. Let's start with communication. First of all, it's not about dictating how people should talk. Rather, it is about optimizing this so that no time is wasted and nobody is misunderstood. And my first point is to never ever start a meeting without an end goal and a time limit. Meetings that don't have them drag on and become a waste of time very easily. It's great if people know about those end goals and time limits even before they join the meeting. And bonus points if you even have a meeting agenda that you share with your people in advance. Next, keep your communication channel specific. So, for example, what I like to do is have a special off-topic chat, have a special general work chat, and I have dedicated text channels for themed conversation. For example, everything just about coding, or everything just about art, or everything about this particular feature that we want to add. Even though it seems quite organized, it saves time and makes it a lot easier to find the conversations you need, especially if this conversation has happened quite some time ago and you now need to refer back to it, remember what was discussed in there. And finally, use voice or video calls for sensitive subjects or long conversations. With sensitive subjects, you don't want to be misunderstood, you don't want to insult anyone by accident. But text is very easily misinterpreted. So if you feel that there is some emotion involved or the topic is not so easy, consider having a face-to-face meeting or at least call in instead of just texting. And for brainstorming or discussions, they're simply easier done and quicker over a call. Just make sure that you take meeting notes about them. And speaking of meeting notes, it takes us to our final topic, knowledge management. Knowledge management is about ensuring that information is saved and accessible. And it relates to all kinds of your documentation in the project. Your game design documentation, your meeting notes, your methodology description, all of this. So my first point would be is taking good meeting notes is a must. It is quite simple, it is very useful, but it is surprisingly a rare skill. Now, you don't need to write everything. Just stick to the facts that you need later. For example, the meeting agenda, so that you know what was discussed in the meeting, the decisions that you made, the important information that was discussed, and the action items you agreed on, and when they are due, what's the deadline, and who is responsible for them. It also helps if you have somebody else to help you with taking notes. I've been in a situation where it is totally possible to both run a meeting and take notes at the same time, but it is much easier if somebody else does it for you. Next, document your project and methodology. So your goals, your values, your constraints, all of those things. As we already discussed, it can help you identify gaps in your own thinking, it helps align the team on the same vision, and it helps a lot with onboarding new people into your project, onto your team. And in general, just ensure that the information is easy to find so that your file and folder names are clear and their location is simple and intuitive. You don't want all your files to be altogether chaotically, but you also don't want to over-organize it where everything is 10 folders deep and nothing can be found. Let's now wrap this up. Your methodology must be determined by your team and project needs. Because your circumstances will change, your methodology will need to adjust as well, and it's nature to do so. Keep what works, adjust what can be better, and throw away what doesn't work at all. Be intentional in your communication and ensure that important information is saved and accessible. And in general, make sure that your approach to organization actually saves time. Just like I don't want to overdo my hand gestures and my facial expressions, you don't want to overcomplicate your organization, where you're the only person who knows how to run the project. So, let's wrap this up. We discussed why volunteer constraints and vision alignment are crucial for project success, how respect and good judgment are needed to lead successfully, and we discussed suggestions and examples on developing a custom methodology. There was a lot in this talk, and I encourage you to look through your notes and see how you can relate with your own experiences to it. But if you could walk away with just 3 things from this talk, I would want them to be this. First of all, be intentional about both the project and the process behind it. Whatever you do, remember why you're doing it and what you hope to achieve with this. 2. Don't be guided by the wrong things. Make sure that you are the leader and the driver, not your ego or your emotions. And finally, nothing is true, everything is permitted. Just like there is no perfect game design formula, there is no one correct way to organize a project. Only your personal research and your experimentation will show you what you can do and how you can adjust for your specific circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. If there is nothing you want to add, let's start the Q&A.
Yep. Before we start, we start. So on the left, here is my email. If you want slides, you can reach out to me. Feedback is also welcome. And on the right from the slides, there are some more recommendations if you want to look into those topics. So Ruth Tomendel, a great speaker, she has a couple of GDC talks. And one of her talks, How Saying No Can Help You Make a Better Game, is entirely about this idea of volunteer constraints. Then the Game Outcomes project, the research that I mentioned, there's a GDC talk on that, and there is also a series of articles about the results and the interpretations of them. Great read. Rami Ismail has a lot of great talks, and if you're interested in plans, budget, or game business in general, I recommend his talks for the Game Academy. And for self-control, for better leadership and clear, solid vision, I recommend Stoicism, the philosophy of Stoicism. And Ryan Holiday and Daily Stoic can be great places to start. And with this said, we can finally get to the question time. Thank you.
Alright then, now we can start our Q&A session. So there is this question, what courses do you recommend for project management?
Yeah, so if you speak about exactly project management, there are plenty of courses that you can do. One of the things I did is Google Project Management Certificate. It is very good. There is also Project Management Institute, which are respected in the industry. And you can also do some certifications, for example, for Scrum, to become a Scrum Master. And it is good to be familiar with those things. But I also need to emphasize that in every role that you have, there will be more or less project management that you need to do. Project management is usually about the business side of things. So like your how to organize the process, how to do the business, how to plan the things, how to plan the budget. This is the project management usually. The production part of it is often the people's part. How do you communicate? How do you align relationships in your team? And in different teams, in different scenarios, the ratio is always different. And in every team, the role is slightly different. That can be explained like this. So it is good to have those certifications. It is good to learn about project management. Just also don't forget about your people skills.
The next question is, how do you do work-life balance as a project manager?
Oh, this is a good one. Especially if you're a remote worker, I can only recommend some of the tips that work for me. Plan your day. So what I like to do, I make blocks in my day. This is when I work, this is when I take a break, this is when I work, this is when I have a long break. This is entire evening, for example, is for me. This is one of the ways you can do this, so that I like to do it a day in advance, so that I plan my day, and as I'm starting my day, I already know what I am expected to do. I don't have to worry about doing work when I'm resting, because I know that this was time to rest. It was planned, it was meant to be my rest. This is one of the ways you can do this. Another way but in a similar idea, is that set up the boundaries. Even though you want to be helpful for your team, you will not be helpful for too long if you're on the call for 24/7. Try to agree with your team when your time starts and when it ends, so that you know when you can rest. Of course, if something is burning, if everything is on fire, you should probably help them. But if it's not something urgent and it's outside of your work hours, try to keep it to yourself. This is two of the things I can recommend.
So, how do you handle changes in project scope or team conflicts?
This is a great one. So yes, I mentioned voluntary constraints, but of course, you don't have to be entirely rigid in your vision. When there is some good idea, you can implement it. And yes, there should be some change management process, it is called officially. The idea is that you evaluate what you want to be changed and you check if that makes sense in terms of the project. And in fact, I created a graph that I didn't use anywhere, but it was made for this presentation, which comes in handy. So when with changes, the further you go in the project or the more complex it gets, the more expensive the changes are. So in the beginning, for example, when you have just started the project, there is nothing to change if you have your vision changed. You didn't develop much or it's still not connected, it's easy. But let's imagine you're closer to the release and you want to add a major feature. Well, now you have this whole ecosystem of your game and you want to add something into it, but you want to make it harmonic so it doesn't feel out of place. So you need to adjust and tweak all of this. So it's not just this feature you're now working on, it's also all the supportive features around it. And with change management, it's just about evaluating, does this change make sense? Will the costs that are related to this change justify, will the value that we get out of this change justify the costs that comes with it? And whether we have time to implement it. Because feature creep, it's usually not caused by bad ideas. You don't want to work on bad ideas anyways. However, it is bad implementations that come with feature creep. And if you don't give it enough time or money, the implementation will be bad. So with change management, with adjusting your vision, it is just about understanding whether this vision aligns with our values and whether this change that we want to bring makes sense in terms of finances, in terms of time, in terms of quality. Sometimes it means that you have to discard good ideas, great ideas. But once again, it's not about the idea, it's about the project all in all. If you try to add everything that seems cool, you just don't have enough time or money to do this. There must be a balance between being static, following your vision, and being flexible. I hope that answers the question.
What soft skills do you need to be a good project manager?
One of those is definitely a leadership, or more specifically, initiative. So you identify a problem and you see that nobody is going to handle it, and you say, well, okay, maybe I can handle it. Another is conflict management. So there is no specific approach to it. Like, it's not on paper, but there are several approaches to conflict management. The idea is that you know how to handle conflicts, and in general, your communication skills are important. You need to know how to communicate an idea in such a way that the person will understand it. You want to know that you want to try to convince them if it's something important. You know how you want to be able to convince people. And you want to be a person that not necessarily people love, but you want to show that you are trustworthy. You want to be supportive of your team. Because when people feel that they are supported, that they are cared for, they will do much better. So yes, the soft skills for project management is just the communication, the conflict management, and also self-control. There is a lot of this in it. Often you will be the only one who stays with their head cool. You know how to manage yourself, you don't panic. You need to be this person in the room.
How do you motivate and manage your team, especially during crunch times?
That's a good one. When everybody will be motivated differently, and this is one big thing that you need to realize. Even with teams that are driven by vision, for example, still many people have different motivations. For somebody, maybe it is the art expression of something that they matter about. For somebody, it is just maybe the salary that they are after. Somebody else maybe therefore whatnot else. So while you as a leader want to appeal to all those motivations to some degree, so that they care, your people care. When it comes to crunch time, I think it is important to emphasize the values that you're after, to remind your team that this is what needs to be done so that we achieve our goals, and not even in terms of revenue, for example, but rather, guys, we wanted to make this as best as we could. And here are the things that we need to make to deliver this level of quality. I know it's hard, but I will be with you throughout this time. So let's be in it. And in fact, yes, this is one of the final things, and most important ones. When you're in crunch time or in just difficult situations, you need to be the leader. You cannot just sit on your chair, say, let's do it, let's rock, you crunch, and then you do nothing. When your team crunches, they expect you to understand them, to, in a way, do the same thing. If you're just the boss that orders them, commands them, they don't feel appreciated, they don't feel like you're genuine. But when you're a leader who understands your team and who is there with them, it is now they see that you care, they see your support, and they are much more motivated to go through this difficult period. And also, as a leader, once again, you just need to stay cool under pressure, self-control, all of those things. So be there for your team, be self-controlled, cool-headed, and know the values that you're after. Remind your people what you're after, why we need to do what we need to do.
Any tips for improving communication in a remote or hybrid work environment?
Yes, definitely. It is important to stay in communication, in close touch. I would say establish regular communication practices. So, for example, like what we did with daily stand-up meetings that we turned into text reports. It is a little more unnatural to send text messages than to just approach somebody and say hi as if you were in person. But this communication is still vital. You still need this. So you want something to, in a way, trigger this constant communication. You want to feel okay with messaging your people. You want to develop such a culture where it is normal, where it doesn't feel strange, where it's natural to message people. And also, even if you're remote, even though a lot will be texting, still have some meetings. Of course, don't make everything a meeting. Not every conversation needs to be one, but you want to keep conversation open and going. In remote settings or in hybrid settings, it will take a lot more effort, especially as a project management or the producer, but it is something that needs to be done.
That will be all. Thanks for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. And if there are any more questions, then I guess we can wrap up.